Hey artists! So now it is time to create some flowers to put into our Ming Dynasty vases. So you can go ahead and either follow along with me in drawing these flowers, or you could create your own flowers to draw. If flowers really aren't your thing, you could try drawing something like cactuses or succulents to add to your vase too. Or you could do a mixture of both. So I am just drawing random flowers that I created in my head. I'm sorry, I don't know the names to any of them. So here's a stem. I'm making sure that each of my flowers have leaves and stems because those will be poking out of my vase too. You want to make sure that you have some greenery, and the leaves and stems will help you do that. So there is my first flower. And then we're going to do a second one. The second one here, I'm just going to do like a big green leaf. So it almost looks like a giant blade of grass. Remember that when you are drawing your flowers, that you're going to have to cut these out eventually. So you might want to avoid doing something that's going to be really difficult to cut out. It was a lot of work cutting out my flowers, so yeah, I would just recommend doing something that you know that you'll have the patience to cut out later on. Also, we will be painting these flowers with our watercolor paints, so you can draw flowers that you know you can add some fun colors to. You can see that a lot of my flowers are just kind of like squiggly designs. They have different layers that start small and get bigger, and they'll kind of take on a floral shape. These are kind of like an easy way to draw roses if you were looking down into the rose. And again, I'm making sure that I'm drawing stems for my flowers so that when I put them in my vase, you'll be able to see those little stems poking out. And here is my first sheet of flowers. Then I'm going to do a second sheet so I have more flowers. You can do as many or as few flowers as you would like. I'm just doing several because in case you guys haven't noticed, I really love drawing flowers. Also notice that I am using my pencil to draw these flowers. I hope you are all using your pencil too and not just going straight to your Sharpie. Okay, so here's a flower that I know the name of. This flower is a daisy. So it's a pretty classic flower. You start with a circle and then have petals coming out from that circle. Now I'm going to add my stems. I'm making my stems pretty thick because when I cut these out, I don't want them to just be so thin that it's going to fall apart. So make sure you're adding thickness to your stems as well as your petals. Keep in mind we are cutting these out later, so don't make your life difficult later by having really intricate, tiny details that you'll have to cut out. So now this flower is going to be kind of a funky shape. I'm going to imagine this one's going to like come out of my vase and give it some interesting shapes and textures. So like I said, I'm kind of just making these up as I go. So if you are creating your own, you can make up whatever funky flower shapes you want to. And then for this one, I'm going with another kind of fun shape, kind of similar to that blade of grass I drew earlier. I think this is just going to be a piece of like green coming out of my vase. It'd be kind of cool to have a vase made of shapes all like that. And here I'm just adding to that. I'm already thinking about the colors that I'll want to paint these when I'm done with them. I think one of the reasons why I like to draw and paint flowers so much is because it gives me an excuse to use like all of the colors in my paint palette. So my last flower here is going to be a tulip. Tulips are flowers that we always see around this time of year. They're usually the first flowers to spring out of the ground in the springtime. And then this one next to it's kind of like a tulip bud. So it looks like a flower that hasn't quite opened yet, but it's about to. And then putting the finishing touches with adding my stems. And remember, I'm doing those stems nice and thick so that I can cut them out later. And then our next step will be to outline this in Sharpie. So I'm going to speed through that. And then after the Sharpie, we'll be ready for our paint. So now we'll start with our watercolor painting. So you guys have used watercolors a lot by now, so you kind of know what to do. Remember to always wet your brush before you put your brush into your paints. A dry brush on your dry watercolor isn't going to work. You need to make sure that your brush is nice and wet. But it's also about finding a balance between what's too wet or not wet enough. If you add too much water, things might get really messy and your colors might blend together or they might blend out of the lines. So make sure that you also have a paper towel next to you. You could always dab your brush off on your paper towel if you think you have too much water. Also, if your paint does go out of the lines or your colors do bleed together, don't worry about it. That's just a normal part about watercolor. Your colors will bleed and go over the lines, and that's okay. Also, remember, we'll be cutting these flowers out, so if they do go out of the lines, you can just cut that out anyways. So I'm using my paint palette to mix up different colors of paint. Since all of my stems and leaves are going to be green, I wanted to make my greens a little more interesting. So I experimented with doing some greens that were a green added with yellow. I also did some green that I added blue to, just to get some different ones. Remember that if you're using green, then going to yellow, that your yellow is going to turn kind of a greenish color. Something that you can do is use a paper towel or a Kleenex to kind of wipe that yellow paint section out and get the green out of there. So here I go, adding all these different bright colors to my flowers. I think my goal in this painting was to use like every single color in my paint palette. I'm pretty sure I succeeded. I'm even using those black and browns in there sometimes. Remember that if you do add black to a color, that you only want to add a tiny little bit because the black paint is very overpowering. So you just have to add a little bit. As you're painting, if you are finding that you're having a hard time figuring out how much water is good and how much is too much or not enough, just ask me and we can work through it together. Here I'm using like a really pale yellowish green. We're going to be gluing our flowers and vases onto a black piece of construction paper. So these bright colors that I'm using for my flowers are really gonna pop on that black paper. Now I'm just adding a little bit of blue to those daisies. I probably could have left them white too, but I just could not resist adding more color. Now I have my second sheet of flowers. I'm just gonna go through really quick on this one just to show you guys what they looked like, but they're pretty similar to my first sheet. I'm experimenting with mixing my colors together. So this batch of flowers is a bunch of reds and oranges, yellows. I'm even adding a little bit of purple there to add some shadow to my flowers. And like I said before, you could experiment with trying to draw like cactuses or succulents too if flowers aren't your thing. So here I'm cutting out all of my flowers. One by one, I'm cutting them out. And now it's time to arrange my bouquet. So I have my glue and my black paper. Remember that a little bit of glue goes a long way. So you just need like the tiniest little dots of glue on these flowers to make them stick. So a little glue goes a long way with this one. You're going to want to probably glue your flowers down first and then your vase last. And I had one extra flower that just did not fit in, so I glued it down at the bottom. Enjoy making this, guys.